the subtitle Agaganu Gabil Adaran, the Great Repeat of Times. So going through the tenses and in specific the main tenses of Neo-Khuzdul. But before we do that, let's repeat some of the exercises of last week. Which of the following statements concerning the town picture is correct? More than one answer possible. So let's go through those. Okay, so first line. So what we're trying to figure out is what they are saying correct. So first of all, they're saying here, Manar tati aya kurnul. So manar is the market. Tati it is. Aya upon. Kurnul. So kurnul is Bridge Street. Now, Kurnul is in the south of town, near the barber, while the market is in the north of town, at the square, at the Aya Ibal, at the square. So clearly, this is not correct. It's at the complete opposite of town. So next one, An tati durathuk zirsi nul. So the An is the river. River is next to Zirsin Nul. So Zirsin Nul, Zirsin is the forest, so that's in the top right corner of the map. And right next to that is Forest Street, Zirsin Nul. Now, it's not that far from the river, but you can't say it's next to the river. I mean, Shulnu Nul, Dock Street is next to the river. There are quite a few others, like Kasap Nul is next to the river. All of those, but not Sirsi Nul. That's a bit too far. So, yeah, that is not correct. Next one, Kirbin Lutati Ayagedul Nul. So, Kirbin is the stable. You might recognize the word for horse in there. Kirbin Lutati is not upon Gedul Nul. Happy Street. It's a fine name for a street, Happy Street. So Happy Street or Gedul Nul is all the way here on the left top of the map. Now the stable is on the right side of the map, so the Kirbin. But the statement is it is not on Happy Street. So yeah, that's a correct statement. It is not on Happy Street. It is on Kirbin Nul, aptly named Stable Street. So that one is correct. Zelem kur tati kur izul ni itnin. What does this mean? Can anybody help me out here with the translation? Zelem kur tati kur izul ni itnin. Yeah, perfect. So Zelem kur is the west bridge. Then you also have Nut kur is the east bridge. So Zelem kur tati kur, it is bridge izul only. It is the only bridge. Ni itnin. In the town. Well, I clearly said that you have Zelemkur and Nutkur, so it cannot be the only bridge in town. So yeah, that one clearly is not correct. Then the next one, Zirsin tati durathuk shulnunul. Zirsin tati durathuk shulnunul. So Zirsin, we've said earlier, is the forest. Tati durathuk is next to Shulnu Nul. Shulnu Nul is Dock Street, and yeah, it's right next to that. So that would be correct. Right, so that was the first part. Now, the second part was a bit of, trying to figure out which lines would be correct instructions. Because what we're asking here is which lines of the below lines would you use to correctly direct a group of 3 dwarves from the stables to the tavern? Their backs are facing the stables. So several answers must be selected. So there were quite a few. So let's go through what we had there. So this is where we start at the Kirbin at the stable. And we're heading over to the Girgin, the tavern on the other side of town, basically crossing the river. So first thing that they're saying here is, and you might get these in a different order for when you were doing these exercises, by the way. So first thing they're saying here is Zai shulnu ifbiri uruan. So Zai shulnu ifbiri uruan. So let's start with the first thing. Zai shulnu. So at shulnu is dock, at the dock. So at the dock, ifbiri uruan. What's that second part? Ifbiri uruan. Yeah. So what are they supposed to do here? Are they supposed to be swimming? Because Zij shulnu ifbiri uruan basically means at the dock, you go forward over the river. So, well, there's only one way to go forward over the river, and that's to swim, I would guess. So, yeah, I would say that's not a very good instruction to send people off to the tavern. So, yeah, that's not a good one. Besides, you would end up at Atanul, which, well, is on the other side of town. That's a good start. But you'd be drenched and, well, hope you can swim because otherwise you're in trouble. So, yeah, so that's not a good one. Okay, so let's see. The next direction we're getting. Ibnisi la fahamnul. Ibnisi la fahamnul. So, can anybody translate this one? Ibnisi la fahamnul. Yep. So, exactly. Go left, and it's vital that you said here everyone, right? Because it's not something you would translate in the line. You would just say go left until North Street. But the fact is that it's Ibn Si, you're addressing more than one person. So it's good that you're saying everyone or all or whatever, just to pinpoint that, to give that information along. So Ibn Si la fahamnul, you take a left on North Street. That's pretty much what it is saying. So yeah, that would be correct because we're here, we're at the Kirbin, and then if we take a left on North Street, yeah, that's taking us in the direction of the Girgin of that where we're supposed to be heading. So that is a correct one, right? So then the next one, Ifbiri la ibal, gajij uru ibal. So let's start with the first thing. Ifbiri la ibal. What is that? Ifbiri la ibal. So ifbiri la ibal gajij uru ibal. So go forward until you're at the square and then over the square, which is pretty much where we should be going if we're going to the tavern. So that one is correct as well. The next one is Durathuk Zahar Aya Gamilnul Tatitir. Now, Gamilnul is indeed the street that is pretty close to where we are currently. So we're at Ibal Nul or Ibal at the square, at Square Street. Gamilnul is on the opposite end, and it says Durathuk Zahar, so next to the house, Aya Gamilnul, upon Old Street, Gamilnul. Tatitir, it is there. It's not there. The tavern is not there. The tavern is on a completely different street, so that is clearly not a good direction. So this one is false. Next one. Gajij igjiji ibalnul duubnus. That's a lot of jjj, but Gajij igjiji ibalnul duubnus. What are we saying here? Yep. So then what it says is then follow Square Street to the left or on the left, basically. Right. So to the left, you're heading into that direction. So that's pretty much identical to English. But yes, absolutely spot on. Gajij igjiji ibalnul duubnus. So then you follow the Square Street to the left. So if we do that, we go in the right direction. We're heading to the Girgin, so that's correct. So this is a good statement. Then the next statement is La satin zai kasabnul. La satin zai kasabnul. What does this mean? Yeah, and kasabnul would mean Cake Street. Yes, the most delicious street in town, no doubt. So until you are at Cake Street, which is pretty much where our arrow points now, Cake Street. So that one is absolutely correct. Then the next one, Yadi Tati Aifbaru Himdin. What does that mean? Yep. So here it is. Here it is. So Yadi Tati. Here it is. Aifbaru in front of Himdin, the bakery. So, well, no, because if it's in front of the bakery, it's pretty much in the river, right? So that cannot be a correct statement because the bakery is on Kasabnul, and in front of the bakery, we basically have some sort of edge that leads us directly into the river. So yeah, that's definitely not good directions. So that's not a correct statement. Then the next one, Gajic ifbiri uru zelemkur. Gajic ifbiri uru zelemkur. What is that? So yes, so Gajic ifbiri, go forward, and then uru zelemkur, over the West Bridge. So go forward over the West Bridge. So that is exactly what we're going to do or have to do to get to the Girgin. So that's correct. And then the last statement, which says, Ifbiri tatitir aya ubnus. Ifbiri tatitir aya ubnus. What does that mean? Yeah, so ifbiri, so go forward. Then tatitir, it is there. Aya ubnus, on the left. So that is exactly what it says. So ifbiri, go forward. So there's a little bit because they've just crossed the West Bridge. So there's a little bit to go. So go forward. Tatitir, it is there upon the left. If it was aya ubnuzu, it would be aya ubnuzun, it would be upon your left. But that's not what it says. Upon the left. So yeah, and that is also a correct statement because that gets us straight to the Girgin where we're supposed to be going. Okay. Then some translations that were left in the exercises. I like it, dwarves, dogs, and food. Pretty rough and perhaps slightly weird translation request here. But what I was going for was Maharikihu Kazad Kanab Ra'ablag. You could also have said Kazad Kanab Ra'ablag Maharikihu. You could also have said that. But sticking to the format of what was requested. Now, the thing is, some wrote Mahariki, which is I side with, I like, right? Maharikihu is I like it. Both would be fine. Yeah, you might need to add like a dash or a comma or something like that. But apart from that, both meanings are okay. You could say I like it or I like, these things. Or I like them. You could say that also as well. Mahariki hun. You could also say that when you're talking about, like in this case, more than one of these things. So I wasn't too strict on this. Then the next one. Zamap kimi zelaf igam ra hadaru zulul zai manar. So let's start with the first word. Zamap kimi. We will buy. Yes, because mapkimi is we buy. The za indicates will or shall. So we shall buy. Then zelaf is the word for a bed. Igam is a chair. So we have we will buy a bed, a chair, and ra, and then hadaru zulul zai manar. What does hadaru zulul zai manar mean? So hadaru is a keg of. Some of you translate a barrel of. That's fine as well. So hadaru zulul, keg of ale. Zai manar, at the market. So manar is the market. So again, what is this saying here? We will buy a bed, a chair, and a keg of lager at the market. So yeah, that's a pretty decent shopping list there. Okay, and that will do for the repeat. Now let's go into a bit of other territory. What I'm putting up here are a couple of the what is called radicals, the radical sets of words. So we have seen plenty of words. I think we're at 600-700 at this point in the lessons, if not more. Now, what you see, what is typical of Neo-Khuzdul, because it's a Semitic language, is that words that are related to each other will use the same radicals, which means that they are built from the same consonants. So we have words with ZRS in it, GLB in it, MLK, and so forth and so forth. And they all are linked to a specific meaning. They all have something in common with one specific meaning. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to give you a couple of words And you guys, it's a bit of a game, if you will. You guys let me know, pick which of these you think is linked to that. Now, we've seen these, so if you've done the flashcards, this should not be that hard, I think. But let's have a look. The first one is the word for red and the sun. What radicals are we looking at here? BRZs, indeed. From which words, if you can recall? Yep, Baraz is red, Ibris is the sun. Absolutely spot on. Right, so BRZ. The next one, tree or forests. Might be a bit more difficult, tree or forest. Yep, and could you recall the words in question? Zirzin is forest, and tree is zars. Tree is zars. So zars and zirsin is the forest. Literally, Zirsin means the place of trees, which is pretty good, apt name for a forest, I would say. So tree and forest, ZRS, is absolutely spot on. Next one, words or speaking, GLB, and words is Galabi. So Galabi, words, Galabi, words. And then speaking, well, we haven't seen the gerund form, but all of the verbal forms that you've seen, taglibi, saglibi, and all of that, obviously all use those radicals. So absolutely spot on. Right, next one, dark ale or tavern. Yep, and do you recall the words? Girgin, because of course you need all three of these radicals to be in there. So garg indeed is dark ale, and girgin is tavern. Now, Girgin literally means place of the dark ale. You might think, well, that's a bit weird for tavern. Why is, it's not, for instance, Zilin, because Zilin means something else. Zilin means brewery, ale brewery to be exact, or lager brewery. So, anywho. Then, next one. So that was a correct one. Next one, chest or keg. Chest or keg. Yep. Yeah. Think of the exercise we just reviewed. The word was in there. Do you recall the words for chest and keg? Yep. Hadar and hadar. Absolutely. So hadar is a keg or a barrel, and hadar is the chest. Absolutely correct. So these words are related to things that contain something. A box, for instance, also has that word. Also has those radicals. Then half or hobbit. Half or hobbit. What radicals are those? MLK, yeah. Can you recall the words for half or hobbit? Yep, Mlak is half hobbit, Malkoon, and hobbits, Malkan. Absolutely. Spot on. Then drink or water. And in the meantime, I'll have a drink of water. Well, water is shalak, and it's one of those, well, I'm calling it weird nouns because they have an extended vowel, the first vowel, because usually it's like the second one, if there's one. Like Baha also is one of those where you have an extended vowel as the first vowel. So shalak is water, and then shalk is a drink. So shalk. But you also have a sheluk, which is a cup of something, right? Also related to this. So yeah, spot on, nicely done. Okay, then the next one, yellow or blonde? THF, and then that is correct. Can you recall the words for those? Yep. So tahaf being yellow and tihif being blonde. Absolutely. Then I think that's the last one of our list. House and room. Yep, ZHR. And do you by chance recall the words for those? So room is Zahari. And the reason, one of the things that I want to point out about the pattern for Zahari, it's also the pattern that we find for words, which is Galabi. It basically means element of something. So anything that has like Galabi, Zahari, with those two A's and then ending on an I, means element of, part of something. So Zahari is room because it's part of a house. Words is part of language. So that's the logic behind it. It's one of those noun types that uses that form. So we've seen a few of those, but I'm just pointing it out. That's the logic behind it. That it basically indicates it is part of something larger. In this case, a room is part of a house. Words are part of language. Right. Okay. So that's labiri nu done, I believe. If not mistaken. Yep. Let's move on to the next one. Haburma. I'm going to let you listen to it first, then listen again with the texts, and then yet again with the translations. So here we go.
Oita, kasamhili, igim. Birashagamami ak balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal.
Kun, birashagamami balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal, malaglak, kufne saddani.
Kuna, birashagamami balagmi malaglak. Ak tadamni. Ak sulutmi ralu atsu yadi. Ralu katadamni nidarinkhadi.
Ak aslati zu.
Birashagamami balagmi karal sulu.
Kut, sulhun.
Kun, gajijajal naitdin.
Right. Okay. So this is probably one of the longest, if not the longest, text we've had so far. Now I will let you listen to it again with the Neo-Khuzdul script next to it, and then we'll see if anybody wants to venture a guess what some of these things mean. So let's listen to it again.
Oita, kasamhili, igim. Birashagamami ak balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal.
Kun, birashagamami balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal, malaglak, kufne saddani.
Kuna, birashagamami balagmi malaglak. Ak tadamni. Ak sulutmi ralu atsu yadi. Ralu katadamni nidarinkhadi.
Ak aslati zu.
Birashagamami balagmi karal sulu.
Kut, sulhun.
Kun, gajijajal naitdin.
Right. So before I give you the translations and we'll listen to it again, anything at all that you can already kind of filter out? Obviously, perhaps not the essence of all of it. That's not what I'm expecting. But if anybody wishes to venture a guess at some of the things that you're seeing here. Any words that appear familiar? There's quite a few that we've already seen, actually. So we have, as you said, oita. We have kasamhili, right? Birashagami. There is kuf. There is yadi. There is kut, suluhun. Well, there's words like lu, for instance. Kuna, kun and kuna. I don't know if any of you recall the difference between those. Kun and kuna. Yes. So both mean yes, to be exact. Kuna is indeed the positive answer to a negative question. Let me put it that way. And we see, for instance, kuf ne saddani, right, as the question there. So ne is also a word that we know. So yeah, there's quite a few things, but obviously the essence of it are the words that, we just don't know at this point, I would say. So let's listen to it again, and I will provide the English translations.
Oita, kasamhili, igim. Birashagamami ak balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal.
Kun, birashagamami balagmi karal.
Sablagi karal, malaglak, kufne saddani.
Kuna, birashagamami balagmi malaglak. Ak tadamni. Ak sulutmi ralu atsu yadi. Ralu katadamni nidarinkhadi.
Ak aslati zu.
bira shagamami, balagmi karal sulu.
كوت سلهون
Kun, gajijajal, nate din.
Right. So somebody was hungry, apparently. Okay, so what we're seeing here is we are, first of all, there's a conversation of two dwarves, and one of them just couldn't wait anymore. She was that hungry. She was ravished, and she ate all of the sausages. Poor fellow. Now he has not a single sausage left. Now, the aim here of this is to indicate a tense that we haven't seen yet. Now, what I want to point out here, well, apart from some of the things that we kind of could have parsed, if you will, kind of could have found out. Ne-idin, for instance, at the end, don't wait. So idin is an imperative. So if you know the TDN radicals of to wait, then you could have kind of gotten that one. There's a couple of others, but what we're looking for here is the verb forms that are the perfect, the perfect tense. So all of the verbs that we've seen so far have either been the imperfect forms, so which we see here as well. Let me give you an example. Sablagi karal, for instance, here on the fourth line, sablagi karal, you ate the sausages. So he's asking a question. Sablagi, that's a form we know. This conjugation we know, right? You ate the sausages, sablagi karal. By the way, it's in this case it should be sablagiya because he's talking to a female. I just noticed. So it shouldn't be sablagi, it should be sablagiya. But anywho, sablagi karal, you ate the sausages. This is a form we know. But if we then look at the previous line where we see balagmi karal, I ate the sausages. Normally it would be ablagi karal, I ate the sausages. Ablagi karal. Now we're using balagmi here because that's a new verb form that we're seeing. So balagmi karal in the third line there is one of those examples, but there's quite a few more in there. For instance, there is the line, I felt hungry and you were not there. Ak sulutmi ralu atsu yadi. Now, sulutmi and atsu are also perfect tenses. So not the imperfect that we know, that we've seen before. So sulut me, I felt hungry. Like balag me, I ate sausages. This is a completely new form we haven't seen yet. Atsu, you were atsu. Now normally, by the way, the form is also the male form that he's using here while he's addressing a female. So anywho, atsu, normally the form that you would use is sati or satya, right? Which is the imperfect form. But now we're using something else. We're using atsu, which is to be, but then in the perfect form. Then we have katadanmi. I couldn't wait anymore. Tadanmi. So again, the ka added to I can not in this case. Lu katadanmi. So lu ka is I couldn't, I can't. Luka, and then tadanmi, wait. So I wait. Tadanmi. Again, that's not the form that we've seen before. That's not an imperfect. That is a perfect form. Now, all of these things, what do they have in common? That is what I'm trying to go point at here. So forms like balakmi, I ate the sausages. Or tadanmi, I waited. Katadanmi, or luka katadanmi, I couldn't wait. Or sulutmi, I felt hungry. So what do you think these forms have in common? Why are we using a different tense in this case? Any ideas? Any thoughts on that? Yes. Well, that is, I would say that is not entirely wrong. Let me put it that way. It's not the key focus of this time or tense, and that is where Neo-Khuzdul becomes a weird linguistic experiment compared to any other natural language. Anywho, let me explain in detail. Let's kind of focus on all of these. Now, these red forms that you see here, as you've indeed noticed, these seem to all of be past tenses. I ate, I waited, I felt hungry. All of these red forms here, the balagmi, tadanmi, sulutmi, they all seem to be past tenses. Now, you could be mistaken at first glance for thinking that the verbs shown here in red indicate a past tense. They do, but it's vital to understand that the perfect tense that we introduce here, like balagmi, is not necessarily a past tense. Likewise, the imperfect, the one that you already know, which we've seen since lesson 1, is not necessarily a present tense either. For instance, sablagi, which we see here on the third line, sablagi karal, you ate the sausages. Sablagi is also translated as you ate. That's also a past tense. And yet, we're not using a perfect form here. Yet, we're using the imperfect. So what's the deal here with why some of these are translated as past tense, why some of these are translated as present tense, and they seem to kind of blur a little bit. So what's going on here? Well, if we look at what this is, so the perfect tense, when do we use it? We use it when facts are dependable. Now, this can be in the past, this can be in the present, or it can even be in the future. So, for instance, the terms here, Durin will awake, for a dwarf, that is a fact. That is non-negotiable, that will happen, and that's the end of it. I am a dwarf, that is a fact. Then Erebor fell, that is a fact. All of these things are either future, present, or past. They're not necessarily past. Now, the vast majority of the things that will use this perfect form will be translated in English as past. Why? Because, well, you're 100% sure of things that have happened in the past. Hence, they're facts that are dependable. So it's very frequent that you will use the perfect tense translated as the past in English. But that doesn't mean that it's necessarily so, right? So you might have future tenses or present tenses that are translated as such. So it can be the past, yet this is not necessarily so. And that is a key feature to remember, because often people's go-to past tense is the perfect, and I completely understand that if you're translating things. However, always think, is it dependable? Is it a fact that we're talking about, what this is? There's also a lot of implications when using this, so keep that in mind. So when it's translations from English to Khuzdul, often we see the perfect to convey the past. But when it's translations from Khuzdul to English, you should use the perfect only when facts are dependable. So when you are translating from Neo-Khuzdul to English, always think about, okay, what is it they're trying to say? Perhaps there are other words that can indicate time as well. Words like today, within an hour, tomorrow, yesterday, whatever. So all of these words, or even adverbs like, suddenly, or, all of these elements into it might indicate already some tense. So keep that in mind. It's not always past tense. It frequently is, but not necessarily so. So that's on the perfect. Let me give you a couple of practical examples. So let's start with to eat. So this is the imperfect and the conjugations that we already know. Ablagi, sablagi, sablagia, tablagi, tablagia, and so forth, which is with the stem blag, which is, what we have. So the stem basically, and often translated as the present tense. I eat, you eat, etc. So that is what you usually have. Now with the perfect form, what we see is there's not, in contrast to the imperfect form, with imperfect you have something that you add at the front and something you add at the back. With the perfect form, that is not the case. You have a stem, which has 2 vowels, by the way. Well, if it's a 3 radical word, has 2 vowels. And then you have the endings mi, su, si, a, I, ma, sun, sin, on, in. So those are the endings. Completely different endings, kind of hinting sometimes, especially on the second person, the su, si, sun, sin, kind of that might give you kind of a bit of an indication. The rest, not as much. So balagmi is I eat. Ablagi is also I eat, right? Or you could translate as I ate, which is what would normally happen. But again, is it a dependable fact? Are you saying, okay, for instance, an hour ago, I ate sausages, then, that's pretty much a fact. I mean, the sausages are in your stomach. It's a fact. You've eaten them. So you can pretty much say, balagmi karal. I ate the sausages. That's not negotiable. It happened. You're pretty sure about that, right? So it's a dependable fact. And a lot of these dependable facts are simply going to be translated as the past because they've happened. And because of the fact that they've happened, they are dependable. Now let's have a look at the next one. TDN, which is wait tadan, or which is the stem. So addani, I wait. Saddani, you wait. So all of these verb forms and conjugations we've seen. So now we see the same thing happening here. Then the stem is tadan, and then we add mi, su, si, a, I, ma, sun, sin, on, in. Those are the tenses there and the endings for those. So again, the endings don't change according to the verb. The stem will change. Now, currently we've seen two perfect stems that both have a vowels. That's not always the case. We'll see one in a minute that does not have a vowels. So, and often this is translated as I waited, because if something is dependable, either you would say to somebody, I will wait for you, guaranteed, come what may, I will wait for you. Then you would still use the perfect, even though it's in the future. Let's say somebody, the love of your life is sent to prison, and you're saying, whatever happens, girl, I'll wait for you. That, in your heart, that is dependable. And to convey that dependability, you will use this tense, even if it's in the future. So it's not necessarily the past. So please keep that in mind, because often out of simplicity or out of the usual conformity of English, we will translate imperfect as present and perfect as past. That is not always the case. So please keep that in mind. What it does do is the perfect conveys things that are absolutely dependable, that are facts. That is what the perfect does. And oftentimes that will be the past, but definitely not exclusive. Let's have a look at another one, which was also in the text. So to feel hungry. Note, sometimes this is also translated as I am hungry. I prefer the translation to feel hungry because it really is a feeling, this gnawing of hunger, not just the fact that you are hungry. So aslati, I feel hungry, or sulutmi. Now we've seen two previous stems with a. Now this is a stem with u. Now you might recall that an imperfect stem has two options. Either it's an a vowel stem or it's an I vowel stem, which we've seen in various verbs so far. Now here we've seen two types at this point of perfect stems, with a or with two a's or with two u's. So this is one with two u's. So sulutmi, sulutsu, and so forth. So again, what you put after it is the same. So mi, su, si, a, I. So all of those do not change. What does change is your stem. And the form of your stem also doesn't change. What I mean is it's going to be consonant, then either a or u or another vowel, which we might see in a minute. Then another consonant, another vowel, another consonant. That structure is going to be the same. Just like your structure of your imperfect stem, which is slat in this case, will also be the same. It's going to be consonant, consonant, and then either an A or an I, and then another consonant. So those structures remain the same. What doesn't is the vowels that are used, basically. That is, in this case, the U for sulut. And then, obviously, this is often translated in the past. I felt hungry, but again, not necessarily so. Okay, so let's compare these two, imperfect and perfect. So how do we form the imperfect? So the imperfect is, we're looking basically at, if we look at it from a blocks kind of view, we have the radicals GLB. Now GLB is, in this case, used for words like galabi, words, or, taglibi, I speak, or he speaks, or it speaks. So what we see is the forms used is you add something in the imperfect, you add something in front, and you add something in the back. So in the back, it's either I or ia or ian or in. So depending on singular, plural, male or female. And then what you add at the front indicates if it's first person, second person, or third person. So either a, ma is first person, sa is second person, and then ta is third person. So that is the forms that we have in the imperfect. Now, either this is an A stem, to dwell, for instance, or taglibi, one is with an I stem. Or when we look at the perfect, how do we form that? There's nothing in front of it. It's not like the imperfect where you have a part at the front and a part at the back. You only have a part at the back, which is the conjugation. And then you need to know if this perfect form is using A vowels, U vowels, or something else entirely, which is E or EA. Now, the last two are rare. The E ones are not that rare, but EA will be. The reason why you have these, first of all, the standard forms are A and U, and then the EA one often indicates I use a tool, I use an instrument. So for instance, the word for bed is zilaf, right? So if I say zilaf me, it means I use a bed. That is what it means, literally. I use a bed. It doesn't mean I sleep, it means I use a bed, right? Zilef me would be I sleep. Now, this uses the E vowels. Usually verbs that use the E vowels mean the action done with the instrument, right? With the tool in question. So zilaf me, I use a bed. Zilef me is I sleep, because that is the action you do with that instrument, with that tool. So that's usually the logic behind here. You have what are transitive or tool verb forms, and then you have the common ones, which are the A and the U forms. After a while, when you see a tool named, you could already make a perfect form directly by adding the conjugations to it. As an example, zilaf is a bed. If you want to say I use a bed, if it has that form zilaf, if it has an E and an A, you can simply add the conjugation and make it zilaf su, you use a bed, for instance. That is one of the kind of simple tricks of the perfect. You just take that noun form with the E and the A and you add the conjugation to it, and you have that I use whatever it is, whatever that tool is there. Now, the vast majority of the perfect forms use A and U because they're not related specifically to tools. But those that are related to tools will use double E or EA, depending if you want to say, I do the action of this tool, like I sleep, which would be the double E version, or I use the tool in question, which is EA, which is like zelaf, I use a bed, or zelef, me, I sleep, for instance. Again, you don't need to note all of this down. It is in the notes. I have clarified that, and also the various forms are indicated there. But to keep in mind, the A forms and U forms, or A and U stems in the perfect, they are related to verbs that do not involve tools or instruments. Okay. As with the A and I stems in the imperfect, you must remember in the perfect whether the verb uses a or U vowel. I have added the imperfect and the perfect stems in the flashcards as well, which you could learn, and then obviously you will find those. But in future lessons, in the intermediate lessons, we'll go deeper into some of these forms. Now, another thing I want to point out here is that an important consideration when choosing between perfect and imperfect is also politeness. It's often overlooked, but since the perfect expresses a dependable fact, it can use unintentionally, or it can come across unintentionally as impolite, because you remove all doubts. Like, let's say you're in a negotiation, right? And you use this perfect form and you say, I'm not going to buy, the axe or whatever it is. Then you're basically saying to your merchant, stop trying to haggle. I have made up my mind. This is a fact, a dependable fact, because you're using this perfect. So you close the negotiations, which might be considered abrupt or impolite. So again, there's a lot to consider when using imperfect or perfect, because what are you trying to convey? How does it come across? I've added a document on this, explaining all these little nuances that I have put in the post-class folder. So please have a look at that, because it will explain in a lot more detail what I'm trying to say here. Okay, so going over again when we're talking about dependability. Now, in most Semitic languages, you have, or in most languages, Tukur, just in general, you have perfect and imperfect, which means perfect is past, imperfect is future, and now it's somewhere in between. That is usually where you are at. In Neo-Khuzdul, you just that goes 5-dimensional. It's not like that at all. We have, I've tried to kind of make a little color scheme there. So perfect, the examples are in D and in A, those little points there on the map. So, which is, we have a line that depicts dependability and a line that depicts vivid action. I'll go into detail on vivid action in a moment. But dependability, this is what we've already discussed. If things are a dependable fact, you're going to use the perfect. If things are not at all dependable, you're not going to use the perfect. If things are not a fact, a question, for instance, I cannot think of any question that would use the perfect. Why? Because the very fact that you're questioning something does not make something dependable, does not make it a fact, because you're asking a question. The outcome could be all sorts of things, right? Unless you're confirming something, but even then you're not sure, hence you're asking a question, hence it's not dependable as a fact. So anything not at all dependable will not be in that green zone, which is marked as dependable, as the perfect. So again, dependable facts. Also, personal past. What I mean is, let's say I ate the sausages. I know I ate the sausages an hour ago. That's my personal fact. Past, and because it's my personal past, I know this happened. I'm 100% sure of that. Something to consider as well is that a liar and a thief will probably use the perfect very frequently, because they are trying to convey that things are dependable. That doesn't necessarily mean that they are. So somebody lying will probably also use the perfect frequently to try to convince people that something is a dependable fact. Whether it happened in the past or, recently, or at this very moment. Now, the imperfect, on the other hand, is used for things that vividly happen right now. So, you're telling a story, you're showing vivid, or you're speaking about vivid action, things that are happening in front of our very eyes this moment. That often is the imperfect. So questions, as I said, will also be using the imperfect, because while it is not dependable, then, you're more in that point E and point B. Doubts, again, you're not quite sure about something. Or considerations of politeness. You don't want to be rude, like you're at the market, right? And this axe seller is trying to sell you this axe, and you're like, well, he's a nice guy. I don't really want to definitely say no, but I'm really not interested in the axe. So I'm just going to politely brush him off, because if I use the perfect, well, he knows it's a no, right? It's dependable. I'm saying no, it's no. That's pretty much it. But you're trying to be polite. You don't want to hurt his feelings. So you're going to use the imperfect. So again, there's a lot more to consider than just past and future or present. And Neo-Khuzdul basically takes a step away from the whole concept of time, when it comes to perfect and imperfect. It looks at these things from a three-dimensional, completely different point of view. And obviously, we are trying to fit square blocks into round pegs here, round holes here, because our system in most languages, in English and other languages, is past, future, present, right? That's where what it's built on. While in Neo-Khuzdul, that's not the case. You can express past, present, and future in different ways. You will use verbs specifically, even that, verbs that specifically have a past tense. There's two of them. Ganara is one, which is the past of to have, and kasat is another, which is the past of was. That's form we haven't seen. But what I'm saying is, Neo-Khuzdul has these built-in forms for that specifically to convey, something like I was something in the past, this, or I had something in the past. You could use specific forms for that. But the main tenses, imperfect, perfect, it's on a completely different playing field than our English or any other regular language that we know. So again, if we look at this now and we revisit this text, we see, so if we go line by line, it says, hey, please sit. So igim, by the way, that might remind you of the word for chair, igam. So igim is the imperative form to sit. Birashagami ak balagmi karal. I'm sorry, but I ate the sausages. So she's using this form because, well, they're pretty much in her stomach at this point, right? So she knows she has eaten them. There's no question about it. That is the definite fact that she wishes to convey, right? And he is, wait, you ate the sausages at this point, right? He's questioning. Hence, he's not going to say balaksi, right? He's using sablagi, which is the imperfect, while balaksi would be the female perfect form for you ate. Now, he's not using that because he's asking a question, and a question by definition cannot be a dependable fact. So hence, you're going to use your imperfect. And she says, yes, I'm sorry, I ate sausages, again, confirming what she has done. We're seeing, again, he's asking another question. You ate the sausages already. Again, using the imperfect. Why didn't you wait? It's another question. You're not going to use a dependable fact form for something that you're not sure of. And then she says, yes, I'm sorry, I ate already, but I waited. Another thing in this perfect tense, tadanmi, I waited. So again, she's confirming what she has done, personal past, things that she is 100% sure of. And now he's saying, yes, but I felt hungry, that again, personal past. He's convinced of this because he has experienced this himself. So I felt hungry. And I could not wait anymore. Again, personal past conviction that not a moment longer could I wait. And, I had to eat right there and then. So, katadanmi, lu katadanmi. And then, I feel hungry now. But I feel hungry now. Aslatizu. So this aslati is an imperfect. Why is he using this imperfect? Because again, we're talking about vivid action, things that are happening before our very eyes that you're trying to convince people of that this is a vivid thing happening to you or to another, right? Again, aslati, I feel hungry. This is, happening. This action is happening. So one talks about, the perfect talks about dependable facts, while the imperfect talks about vivid action, right? Or things that are by definition not dependable at all, which, will come in that camp as well. And then another form at the end is ne'idin, which is not a perfect or imperfect, but an imperative. Don't wait. Okay, so let us repeat again. Imperfect, we have a section at the start and a section at the end. That at the start indicates the person, and at the end indicates if it's a male, female, or singular or plural. The stems are either A or I stems. You might have taglibi or tadanmi, for instance. Now, the perfect is ending on one end only. There's nothing in front of it. It's an A or a U stem, and you might also have, when it's related to tools, E or EA. So guluba would be he or it has spoken, or he or it speaks things that are dependable, that you are absolutely sure of. For instance, let's say some dwarf lord has, proclaimed some law, for instance. Then, and people talk about this, they would say, he has spoken this law, guluba, he has spoken. Again, in English, you translate this as the past, but I'd say, might be more of a coincidence that whatever happens in the past is dependable because, people have experienced it, and for them, it is a fact. And that is the reason, not necessarily because it's in the past. And then, of course, our imperatives, which we've seen, so used for commands, obligations. By the way, why are we seeing the perfect tense at the very last lesson? Because it's kind of like a launching pad for the intermediate lessons. Because there we will be using those very frequently. Lesson 9, by the way, this lesson, there's no exercises at the end of it. Okay, we're not doing any exercises because I want to give you the space to do what you need to do with repeating for the exam next week. Now, why, again, am I putting this perfect in there? Because it's one of the three tenses you have to be aware of, that you have an imperfect, a perfect, and an imperative. These are basically your pillars, and I would say 90, if not more, % of everything you will ever translate and see in Dwarvish is these three things. You will have other forms, no doubts. We will see them in the intermediate lessons if you join those. But this is the pillars that you built your house on when it comes to verb forms. Right. Any questions on this at all, folks? That's probably the comment I hear the most when it comes to when do I use imperfect and when do I use perfect. So when you, as somebody that wants to convey something, you'll have to make a choice, and you'll have to decide whether your focus is on indicating that something is dependable, that it's a fact, or if you want to indicate that it is a vivid action. Now, a fact, that's pretty clear. For most people, I'm indicating a fact. This is a yes or no thing, right? Either it's a fact or it's not a fact. That's it. Vivid action is more of a gray zone, in my opinion, and in a lot of people's opinions. When you say something is a vivid action, it is happening in front of your very eyes. I would say the imperfect is like great if you're telling a story, because that's what you're trying to evoke. You're trying to evoke vivid experiences, action, really. That is what it's all about, action. Now, some verb forms, for instance, will never use the perfect. Some, if the verb, unless you're trying to convey he 100%, did this, then you might. But some verb forms, like to doubt, for instance, is very hard to use in the perfect, because doubts is not a fact. Doubts kind of, unless you're saying he 100% doubted himself, he's absolutely, not sure, then that would still count as a perfect. So in the end, to answer your question, if you're kind of on the fence, do I use the imperfect? Do I use the perfect? There's two things, in my opinion, I would consider. Firstly, what is your emphasis? What is it you're trying to say? Are you trying to convince somebody that something is dependable, factual, or are you trying to convey specifically the action that is happening? Are you trying to put the focus on that action? So that is the question number one. Then the second thing is, if in your English line you have no words to indicate that something is past or present, like there's no words like today, tomorrow, within an hour, last week, those kind of things aren't there, then that's another reason, if something is happening in the past, to indicate the perfect, because if people read this, they often will use perfect as past. So you need to kind of play advocate of the devil in a way. You need to think of, if people are going to read this, what will they understand with it? So it's like three-dimensional chess. You need to think 5 steps ahead when you're translating things, if it's for translations, that is. That's why I put, if something is translated from English to Khuzdul and from Khuzdul to English, you often will use, this form to use the to convey the past, for instance. And from English to Khuzdul, people often just use perfect to convey the past. So yeah, to go back to your question, it's a tough one because it all depends where you want to put the emphasis. That's the main thing. But you have to make a choice. Obviously, you can't have both. You can't convey vivid action and at the same time have a dependable fact. You could also use other words to convey dependability and to convey that things are factual, even if you're using the imperfect. But then if you're doing all that trouble to convey something is dependable, you might as well use the perfect, if you see what I mean. So yeah, it's a tough one because, as I said, we're trying to fit square shapes into round holes here. The English or any other language system is completely different when it comes to this kind of system. So obviously we will fall back on what we know, which is present and future and past. And these things can be conveyed, but you need to step back and think, what is it I'm trying to convey? Am I trying to say things are dependable? For some lines, it's very easy. If I say, Durin will awake, right? There's no question. You would not use the imperfect for this. You would use the perfect because you wish to convey something that for a dwarf is an absolute certainty, is an absolute dependability. That is why also, if people ask me for translations like I love you or, he loves her and all of that, I usually go for the perfect, even though the present tense is used. I love you, that's the present tense. But I use the perfect. Why? Because people would say this as if it were a dependable fact. I mean, you're not going to, if somebody uses the imperfect to say I love you, then you're going to ask questions. Why? Why are you not saying the perfect? Are you not loving me? Is there some doubt in your heart? You see what I mean? So you're saying a lot of things by using a specific tense in Neo-Khuzdul. And sorry for going on and blabbing. I hope I got somewhere to the point of your question there, and I haven't put you all to sleep. It will be, but we're not going to go into a lot of detail. So what I mean is, again, everything you've seen from lesson 1 to 9, including all of this, is exam material. There's no exception to it. Now, the thing is, you've not done any exercises on it, but I have in the flashcards given you the stems for the imperfect, the stems for the perfect. All of the perfect tenses are also in the flashcards. So yes, when doing translations, if you use imperfect only, in most cases, I'm not going to hammer on that because there is some flexibility when it comes to translations, especially from English to Neo-Khuzdul, because it all depends on how you view a line and what it is you as the translator wish to convey. If you're focusing on, dependability, or if you are conveying something as if it is vivid speech or action happening at this moment in front of everybody's eyes. So yeah, I'm not gonna, even though it's in some lines, perfect might indeed be recommended, I will be very lenient when it comes to this, because again, my point here of introducing imperfect, or perfect rather, in the last lesson is not to overwhelm you with a very complex system in the last lesson, but to kind of get you ready, first of all, to make sure that you have that overview, that you have those 3 pillars of tenses within Neo-Khuzdul, because these are the rocks where the language is based on, these 3: imperative, perfect, imperfect. Without them, you're lost, and you will see a lot of things don't make sense. With these, a lot of things make sense if you get these. But yeah, it will be in the exam. If you use it, great, even better. If not, I'm not going to come down like a ton of bricks on that. In some cases, you will not have a choice, however. In some cases, some translations, you might indeed need these. But I think it will be pretty obvious, to be honest. I don't think you need to panic about that. But you will need to review it, absolutely. You will need to know things like, when do I use it? When would I not use it? These things will indeed be needed. Again, all of the material from lesson 1 to lesson 9 is going to be in the exam. So the weight of it is probably more than some other lessons. Right. Okay. So that brings us to the end of our lesson 9 here. And with it, the end of the teaching part of the Neo-Khuzdul Beginner Course. So from this point on, the focus shifts from learning new material to trusting what you already know. The exam next week is not meant to catch you out or test obscure edge cases, but to check whether you understand the core logic of the language and you can apply it thoughtfully. Over the coming days, take the time to revisit the notes, the examples, the explanations. If something feels like uncertain, please ask. If something doesn't quite click, you don't exactly know what that means or where you should spend a little bit more time on, reach out with the questions. I mean, I'll be here, so you can just message me on that. Don't wait with those, please. Whatever the outcome of that exam, by the way, reaching this point, in my view, is already something to be very proud of. You've taken a completely foreign language from zero, basically, to structure, logic, nuance, and that's really not a small thing. And I also want to take a moment personally, from my point, to thank all of you for the commitment, for your questions, for making me sweat every now and then thinking of things, and for the effort you've put in. Right, that wraps it up before I get tearful. That would be it for me for now. Thanks again, everybody, and have a great evening.